I'm so proud of my wife and my father for how they've handled all of last year. My children have managed brilliantly as well.
Catherine is in remission now.
Yes.
My father and wife have my utmost admiration for the way they've managed the entire last year. My kids have succeeded wonderfully as well. Catherine is currently in remission. Indeed, last summer, early in the morning, Catherine made a declaration that rocked the British populace. Prince Louis, UC and Princess Charlotte have been admired for their radiant grins and joyful public appearances. However, few could have envisioned the feelings concealed behind those naive facial expressions. However, when Catherine made her, everything changed. Sincere declaration regarding her kids. Outside of Kensington in the Morning Palace had a very strange vibe. It was this odd silence that simply didn't fit the typical mayhem of tourists, photographers, as well as employees. People had collected there by habit. You are aware, anticipating the typical routine, perhaps a car rolling down the window, a little wave, or observing someone slipping into a side entrance. However, instead, there was this. There was a lot of tension in the air, something you felt in your heart before you could possibly determine what it was. A few reporters were already present, but even they were unprepared for the subsequent events. Catherine moved to the front. She came out, without the customary royal fanfare. Really, none of the usual stuff. No, escorts in uniform moving in a line. No flashy vehicle arriving precisely on the mark. She is not being guided or flashed. Subtle cues, and the cause will astonish you. Continue to observe. She had just left one of the palaces doors and continued till she was standing there, in plain sight of everyone here. That choice was that easy. Walk, bearing a burden that instantly settled over the surroundings. Her attire was straightforward and unfamiliar, nothing symbolic of a ceremony or official role. Her face was seen indications of a restless night. Around her, there was a subtle tension. Eyes, the type that can only grow after suppressing intense feelings for too much time. She had a firm posture, although not stiff. Anyone with a careful eye could perceive that she was juggling two forces inside herself. One drawing her in the direction of the function for which she had received training, and the other pointing her in the direction of anything quite intimate. Palace employees at the doorway observed her with reluctance. They didn't approach her, or away from her. They appeared uncertain, if they were seeing the start of a scheduled appearance or anything completely unplanned. You see, there is limited opportunity for royal protocol to improvisation. Every declaration, every picture, every phase is usually prepared in advance of time. The staff's silent perplexity demonstrated that this was a time that belonged to only her. The journalists who had been sensing the break-in, hovering around the pattern immediately. They were familiar with the routine. After years of observing royal behavior, they identified the well-known cues and they noticed precisely what was absent. No briefing notes distributed in advance. No discreet off-the-record advice from the officers of communications. There is no stage management. The lack of all those things conveyed a message much louder than any official statement ever could. It indicated that this wasn't your typical random appearance. This was something extraordinary. As said by one writer who had reported about the royal family for over 20 years, it seemed like a scene that was being rewritten. Public recollection. It was evident to observers that this was not a statement about charitable endeavors or a formal visit. This was a person who decided to stand in front of the globe without institutional defense. That decision carried both danger and significance. The monarchy is established on a controlled presence. Going outside that authority is acknowledged as an act of a sense of urgency. Catherine strolled in the direction of the set microphones earlier for news conferences at the palace. The scene behind her was similarly out of the ordinary. The background windows that are visible were from the royal nursery, the space where kids laugh, play, and learn and develop. It's among the most private and safeguarded areas inside the palace. The fact that she was placed beside the portion of the structure behind her was not staged, but it produced a potent picture. The room's existence in the backdrop to her previous words, even something was said to them, based more on childhood and family than as opposed to royal duty. Her facial expression revealed that this was a difficult step, for she had received training throughout the years to maintain calmness in every circumstance. Though the standards set for royal women have frequently focused on grace and caution self-control. In official photos, she had consistently upheld that standard. However, now, Calmness was evident in a distinct shape. That wasn't all, though. At this point, it was no longer about perfection. It was about discovering strength. In susceptibility. This was the initial indication that she was ready to speak, not from an institutional obligation, but out of personal conviction. The insufficient formal preparation altered the fully dynamic. The audience did not shout or applaud. They comprehended instinctively that this was a moment demanding silent focus. Reporters did not pose inquiries. They held out. Cameras modified their lenses using a gentle mechanical click that appeared to be louder than typical. As stated by palace correspondents, Catherine had expended a lot of her public persona, avoiding needless dramatic feeling. Her preference was to construct trust by acting consistently. She hardly sought attention for herself. This increased the importance of this undeniable moment. When an individual who purposely steers clear of spectacle walks enters the core of one, the significance turns indisputable. She inhaled deeply, seemingly calming all of her thoughts. She did not appear to be a royal figure at that period, however, facing a reality as a mother that could no longer be kept confidential. The kids behind whose windows they were no longer merely abstract representations of future obligation. They were young people, enduring stressors that had started to take a noticeable emotional toll. The Globe had not yet learned the specifics, but the story's shape was now apparent. Since she got ready to speak, the Globe was I had no idea how far this moment would reach. How individual realities are communicated in this courtyard would test how the domestic affairs of the monarchy had been, safeguarded for many generations. What would come next would attract notice in addition to Catherine, but to the silent walls of the nursery behind her. It would demonstrate the consequences of growing up in a royal household weight that most kids are unaware of. Thus, her remarks were going to start a door. She was standing behind that door. Kids and the truth of what they had been carrying into the following portion of this tale. Continue to watch since things are going to get really more fascinating. When Catherine at last started talking that day, the Globe anticipated a polished message, something ready and polished. However, what they received was not the same. She said as someone who had been keeping the peace the impact of her kids' experiences. Additionally, she disclosed that the picture shown to the public had not represented the way of life they led behind the castle walls. George has always been observed by people. Louis and Charlotte grinning during public festivities, as well as official pictures. The pictures displayed coordinated attire, courteous demeanor, and happy facial expressions. Catherine clarified that these instances were only the exterior. There was more to the grins, which the general public had not been permitted to view. The everyday activities of the royal children followed a rigid timetable that started early and concluded late. Every class, every excursion, every adult conversation were seen. Their actions were subtly influenced. That didn't allow for much improvisation. As soon as they awoke, there were procedures they should adhere to and standards to meet. The surroundings of them operated similarly to a measurement system. How they reacted, how they moved, and how they grinned and carried themselves, everything was noted. Catherine revealed that this wasn't merely about education or manners. It was about preparing them to represent a function. There wasn't much room for only little kids. George carried the greatest weight of all of them. As the oldest, he was continually reminded, either explicitly or indirectly, that he was the monarchy's future. Even after 10 years of age, he sensed the strain of a role that was established long before he was born. Psychological studies have long demonstrated that kids who grow up in settings in which expectations are consistently highlighted can experience increased nervousness, particularly when these assumptions seem set in stone and inevitable. Catherine disclosed that George has started posing queries that a child shouldn't need to ask. He was concerned about letting people down. He was concerned about being observed. He was concerned about the notion that his future had already been made. His grin in photographs has occasionally turned into anything he worked on instead of something that was organic. If you find it depressing, wait until you hear Charlotte's role. Charlotte encountered a distinct type of difficulty. She was self-assured and naturally outspoken. From an early age, she had demonstrated a powerful self-perception. She enjoyed picking her own apparel. She enjoyed talking to her thoughts when spending time with family. However, within the setting of the palace, independence was meticulously controlled. There was a silent attempt to mold her into a helpful figure as opposed to a daring one. She was urged to exhibit grace and cooperation at all times. Catherine had started to observe minor alterations. Charlotte was lively when she played by herself, and vibrant. When employees or instructors were there, her body language changed. She started to be cautious. She observed her phrases. Catherine realized that her daughter was developing her self-filtering skills. The reason that filter wasn't constructed was of personal development, yet due to expectations of society. Louis, the youngest, felt the strain in an alternative method. He became conscious of the cameras, earlier than most kids realize of their own image. Starting at the age of 2, photographers would show up, occasionally, many at once, capturing each expression. Initially, he didn't comprehend the focus. As he developed as he grew older, he started to connect crowds and cameras with discomfort. Catherine observed that he would hold her hand closely when in public places. Within private, he inquired as to whether there would be cameras when you leave the house. Research in the development of children has demonstrated that recurrent exposure to excessive surroundings can influence how kids react to novel circumstances, frequently being cautious where they would typically be inquisitive. Catherine noticed that Louis was starting to notice the external environment as a warning rather than freely exploring. However, the wildest part wasn't that. What stood out the most in Catherine's thoughts was the emotional control that is taught in customs of the family. The kids were urged to remain hidden. Indications of trouble. They discovered how to stay written for ceremonies, appearances, and occasions even when exhausted or overpowered. Catherine clarified that she started to see how this self-control was starting to come naturally. There were less outbursts of laughter. There were less impromptu inquiries. There were fewer instances in which they permitted feelings to fluctuate without concern for the way it appeared. Numerous royal biographers have recorded how emotional regulation has been an anticipation within the monarchy for generations. Catherine had developed more conscious of the fact that this expectation was forming her kids before they had even gained a thorough comprehension of themselves. The alteration in their conduct did not occur all at once. That it took place gradually by making little changes in expression, tone, and posture. Catherine explained how she saw that George pondered before responding to positive news while determining whether the response would be suitable. Charlotte had started inquiring as to whether she was standing accurately. Louis, who used to run freely across lawns, had grown cautious in public areas while people were close by. Their natural motions were being replaced with knowledgeable answers. Tutors as well as advisors were crucial in their everyday exchanges. These people weren't cruel, but their goal was to mold the kids into characters appropriate for public life. Their responsibility was to direct, rectify, and continue to be consistent. Catherine noticed that as they carried out their responsibilities precisely, they seldom provided emotional assistance. Expression. Seldom do they promote inventiveness unless it was in line with expectations. It dawned on her that these adults were serving as defenders of custom rather than compared to those who nurtured uniqueness. Catherine arrived to observe that the palace environment did not support the creation of one's own identity. Rather, it promoted the growth of identity that is symbolic. The kids were being ready to symbolize something bigger than themselves. In doing so, the distinctive aspects of who they were became softer, reshaped, or put aside. Catherine realized that this had been the experience of numerous royal generations of kids, including their dad. However, she was unable to ignore the shift when she noticed her kids' happiness waning. Childhood is fleeting. The years in which strong creativity and self-assurance are pure things don't last forever. Catherine acknowledged that the years were disappearing more quickly than she had anticipated. She realized that the world admired the kids, but the admiration comes at a price. Their early years were being molded to serve the royal picture. The polished moments that were shown to the public was created by emotional behind-the-scenes work. As Catherine spoke, she made it apparent that she could no longer permit her kids to reside in a framework that gave public perception over mental health. She recognized that the world appreciated the persistence of monarchy. However, she thought because continuity shouldn't necessitate sacrifice that would mold her children's futures in methods that they could not make their own decisions. This revelation revealed more than just the demands within the palace. It disclosed a more profound struggle between the private requirements of the public and the family standards of a company that has existed for hundreds of years. Catherine's choice to speak candidly signaled the start of a change that the world had not anticipated. It created the conditions for the conflict of emotions. The actual effects of you'll be shocked by her disclosure. Keep an eye out. When Catherine's remarks reached the general audience, the outcome was instantaneous and intensely sentimental. Her voice reverberated throughout Britain and beyond, recollections that had never completely vanished. People started to recall a different woman, who has previously faced the same institution, attempting to keep her sons safe from the same weight that is undetectable. The contrast between Catherine and Princess Diana developed organically in millions of people's minds. It had nothing to do with similarity or look. It was about bravery and suffering. Diana had once said of seclusion inside the palace. It seems from Catherine's statements that thread years later, demonstrating that the struggle was never really over. Old Diana's video started making the rounds once more. On social media and television platforms, snippets of interviews in which she had expressed her desire for her children to feel loved as they grow up instead than under duress were distributed thousands of times. People started to draw similarities between Diana's struggle for emotional candor and Catherine's request for the welfare of her children. Even younger viewers who are too young to recall the life of Diana or her passing in 1997 revealed themselves moved by the pattern, reiterating in front of their eyes. William was overpowered by the palace. He had carried silent recollections of his mother, recollections he seldom ever talked about. Catherine's remarks reopened those emotions. He observed in her choice the similar daring that has previously characterized Diana's latter years. For William, it wasn't only about public response. It was about the recurrence of history, itself in excruciating detail. He recalled the sensation of being observed by the world as his family broke up. Currently, he worried that his own kids would have to deal with the same outcome if the cycle persisted. The public sentiment quickly changed in Catherine's favor. In less than a day, her name dominated international news. Her picture appeared in newspapers on its front pages, characterizing her as the voice of empathy, royal. We're going to disclose yet another startling fact about her. Based on surveys done by YouGov in the United Kingdom, there is a significant rise in her approval ratings and popularity, surpassing all others by more than 80% of members of the royal family. Her name was trending across nations as individuals expressed admiration for being truthful. Groups for parents, public figures, and psychologists started talking about the psychological toll of raising kids in settings that require continuous performance. The tone of the topic of conversation had changed from royal gossip to introspection. Social media turned her message into a global conversation. Millions of videos of her millions heard the speech in a few hours. Websites such as Instagram and TikTok were replete with little videos of her being by myself outside the palace, accompanied by poignant captions and music. Journalists characterized it as the most important royal declaration since Diana's TV appearances. Additionally, King Charles's response to what she said is intriguing. As stated by royal observers, King Charles is not happy regarding the incidents. For him, Catherine's public declaration represented more than emotional integrity. It was a violation of self-control. He saw it as a contest for the order that had kept the monarchy going for generations. In his opinion, personal conflicts should stay confidential, especially in a family whose power was based on calmness and persistence behind closed doors. He voiced worry that Catherine's decision to speak candidly would diminish the public's regard for the crown. His advisors concurred. They issued a warning that compassion could easily become critique, and that once authority over the narrative vanished, it would be challenging to recover. Camilla, who had meticulously cultivated her public persona over time, saw Catherine's abrupt worldwide support as a danger to oneself. For two, she has spent decades trying to obtain approval from the public that previously looked suspiciously at her. She realized how brittle popularity could be. Seeing Catherine get up so fast, worldwide compassion reminded her of how royal reputation might change with ease. There was a palpable tension in the palace halls, arose between the two women. As they were never direct competitors, their roles now, in the public's mind, stood in stark contrast. One stood for custom and obligation, the other symbolized change and passion. Advisors drafting started inside the palace. Techniques to take back command of the circumstance. Professionals in communication suggested phrases that would highlight harmony among the family, implying that Catherine's remarks had been removed from context. Others thought about releasing pictures of the kids showing up joyful and at ease to lessen the narrative's intensity. There were conversations regarding emphasizing the king's function as an encouraging grandfather and father. However, none of these attempts seemed credible. The public's interest had already moved in Catherine's direction as the monarchy's emotional core. Each and every trying to refocus only caused her to appear more genuine. William discovered himself torn between two different worlds: his allegiance to the organization that had influenced his whole life. Conversely, his allegiance to his spouse, who had been honest regarding the pressures in that same organization. The circumstances came to a period at which being silent was no longer a choice. In Clarence's personal space, William, the king, and the house faced each other, in a discussion that conveyed the conflict between generations. The environment was one of informality rather than formality. Feeling the monarch desired a guarantee. William would assist with fixing the public perception of the family by coordinating himself using the strategy of the palace. William was unable to provide that guarantee. He realized that in order to deny Catherine would not only betray her in public, but would also reveal his personal recollections of his mom. The dispute between the father and my son disclosed something more profound than disagreement. It exposed the gap between one's own truth and the royal survival. Charles had grown up in an era when obligation took precedence over emotion. William had grown up seeing that level of control might be disastrous. Their opinions were influenced by various experiences as well as those variations. That day they clashed. The altercation did not conclude with yelling. It concluded in silence, the final type. The choice became evident to William that he would defend his spouse and kids from the same emotional tendencies that had influenced his early years. He comprehended that the price of living like a royal has always been emotionally detached. He has no desire to travel that distance down another generation. In private, he started to retreat from specific palace customs, opting instead to dedicate more attention to their Windsor home, far from continuous oversight. Close friends of later, the pair noticed that this was a pivotal time. William's the emphasis moved from upholding public appearance to ensuring personal security. The circumstances within the palace turned into becoming more brittle. Behind the exterior tension and the serenity of official interactions was substantial. Senior quarters made an effort to control the appearance, despite rumors of internal discord started to seep into the media. Narratives surfaced indicating conflicts over how to handle Catherine's increasing power. Palace sources made an effort to refute them. However, the pattern of minor inconsistencies made the strain more plausible to the public. The monarchy, which had consistently depended on the appearance of unity, today had obvious fissures. I am grateful for remaining with us. Do you believe Catherine made the correct revelation? Choice. Tell us what you think in the section for comments. If you like, share, and subscribe to our video channel.